I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. We have international breaking news. First out of Kyiv, President Zelensky and European leaders are calling for a 30-day truce with Russia starting on Monday. And we've also just learned of a ceasefire between Pakistan and India. CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson is in Islamabad. CNN chief global affairs correspondent Matthew Chance is in New Delhi, India. And CNN chief international security correspondent Nick Payton-Walsh is in Kyiv. We'll start with Nick Payton-Walsh in Kyiv. Nick, tell us how this all unfolded.
Important to stress, this is a seismic moment in the largest land war in Europe since the 40s. Four of the largest economies, militaries in Europe, France, Germany, UK and Poland, their leaders have come here, their significant and risky journey to Kiev to stand alongside Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, to say to him, alongside him, that they will declare from midnight, we think from Sunday into Monday, a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. And they expect Russia to honour that. They have said they have the backing of US President Donald Trump. Indeed, a picture was posted by a senior Ukrainian official of those four men around a telephone with the phrase historic moment, and they confirmed they rang Trump after they'd had their meeting to set out this particular proposal. Well, if Russia does not agree to, the European leaders were clear they have American backing as well for what French President Emmanuel Macron called, quote, massive sanctions against Russia. That could potentially, said Zelensky, involve the banking sector, energy infrastructure as well. But I should point out we're into an extraordinary just over 30 hours now from this public announcement into which Ukraine now must manage what its armed forces do, striking midnight Sunday into Monday, whether they fight back in self-defense or have to lay down arms for a specific period of time. We also are hearing that the United States is going to be assisting, if not partially in control of the monitoring of this ceasefire, so they'll have to upscale that capability exceptionally quickly with great quality and quantity to cover the hundreds of kilometres of front line that's exceptionally violent at the moment. So a lot to do till, but also most importantly, they have to hear from Moscow, who in the past have said that they would potentially support this in theory, but they wanted certain nuances to be answered. That really was called out today by these European leaders as a form of procrastination. They essentially want an answer now, or there will be consequences. But here's what Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had to say.
We've agreed that since Monday, 12th of May, a full and unconditional ceasefire must start for at least 30 days. We together demanded from Russia. We know that the United States support us in this. The unconditional ceasefire means no conditions. An attempt to put any conditions is signaling intention to drag out the war and undermine diplomacy.
It's an exceptionally high-stakes moment. I should remind people that we are, in theory, still in the middle of a Russian unilateral ceasefire, which they declared, their critics say, to essentially make the victory parade we saw on Friday in Moscow go more smoothly. Ukraine says that's been violated hundreds of times. We've seen some of it ourselves near the front lines. That essentially, that ceasefire will be extended by this 30-day proposal to which Russia has yet to clearly respond in any particular way. Look, ultimately, I think this is a way of trying for the Europeans to seize the initiative here, to be sure they don't lose the attention or focus or passion of the White House in trying to get a peace here. Trump is on board this particular initiative, and potentially, indeed, if it does fall apart, like some critics of Russia's military policy here say, there are many suggestions they are simply reinforcing and building up for future offensives rather than contemplating slowing things down. But that will at least be clear in terms of evidence for the Trump administration. But an exceptionally high-stakes moment here for this war. They're calling a very short time frame for something that really hasn't been attempted before. A lot of political onus on these European leaders now. They're promising significant assistance for Ukraine if Russia does indeed violate this. And we're into a new chapter in this now 3-year war. Michael?
Nick Payton-Walsh, thank you for the report from Kyiv. Our fingers are crossed. Let's go now to Nick Robertson in Islamabad. Nick, what's the latest?
Yeah, I was just talking to a source who was literally in the room where it happened, where Secretary of State Marco Rubio, I was told, played a massive role in bringing about this ceasefire, a ceasefire that on multiple times today and even yesterday, because it was in the works yesterday, perhaps over the last 48 hours, as we've been reporting, Pakistan was sort of on a military pause to give a window for diplomacy. What I understand from this source is that that was blown out of the window early this morning when India attacked 3 air bases, one of them here in the capital, just on the outskirts of the capital. That, according to the source, Pakistan responded with a relentless, a massive barrage of missiles and rockets, they say, Pakistan says, into Indian military facilities, bases inside India, air bases, weapon storage, and along that disputed line of control in Kashmir against military bases there. They say that this, from the Pakistan perspective, their communications, how they were communicating with Secretary Rubio, that really put India on the back foot. It didn't know what had happened. India, according to Pakistan, reached out to Secretary Rubio, reached out to the Saudis, reached out to the Turks, reached out to others to find a diplomatic off-ramp, got engaged after that onslaught in diplomacy, but telling the mediators that they were going to go on a pause on the Indian side. And then, according to Pakistan, that didn't happen. There was another exchange of rocket fire. That happened several times during the day today. And it was only in the last couple of hours before this ceasefire came into effect, just about an hour or so ago, that there was enough of a pause to call it and say that this was real, that enough diplomacy and leverage had been put on both sides to get them to stop here. Now, the key issue for Pakistan going forward is water. India has still said it's cut off the water from those 3 vital rivers from the mountains in Kashmir, vital to Pakistan, existential to Pakistan. I said, what about that? And the source said, look, this is a ceasefire. Everything works out from there. But from the Pakistan perspective, they've been up all night. From the Indian perspective, they've been up all night. There was a lot of tiredness. There was a sense that they just wanted to get this done. Otherwise, in the words of this source, it would have just spiraled into something much worse. It was now or never, if you will. It was going to get a whole lot worse. So I think a sense of relief here, but a sense of whiplash too, for what the country's been through in the past few days.
Nick Robertson, thank you for the report from Islamabad. Now we go to India. In New Delhi is CNN's Matthew Chance. Matthew?
Yeah, hey, Michael. Sorry, having a few technical problems here. Must be the conflict. But look, I mean, it's an astonishing couple of hours, actually, because I was listening to Nick Patton-Walsh speak out of Ukraine there about the proposal for a ceasefire there. That's been, or the demand for a ceasefire, that's been very long in coming. It's been more than 3.5 years since the Ukraine war began. And of course, you know, to take a skeptical view, as Nick was pointing out, the Russians have not yet agreed to a ceasefire. But over here on the Indian subcontinent, with this standoff between India and Pakistan, it's not 3.5 years. This latest conflict's only been going on for 3.5 days. And so what Trump has got in his sudden, unexpected announcement of a ceasefire between the two countries is the quick victory that he very much wanted to have but couldn't get with Russia and Ukraine as well. But you know, nevertheless, over the past couple of hours, less than that even, President Trump announcing on his Truth social media platform that a ceasefire has been done between India and Pakistan. That follows a real upsurge in violence between the two nuclear-armed neighbours. Remember, early this morning, India launched unprecedentedly deep attacks inside Pakistan, airstrikes on Pakistani military bases, the deepest inside the country that India has struck for decades, really since the war between the two countries back in 1971. So extremely serious escalation there that led to a furious Pakistani response. They struck dozens of targets, not just in the disputed territory of Kashmir, but elsewhere in India as well. And, the fact that this was taking place between these two nuclear-armed neighbours, I think, shook the international community and shook the United States in particular into action and basically force diplomats from Washington to really get engaged and to bring the two sides together to get them to step back from the brink. Remember, it was only a couple of days ago that J.D. Vance, US Vice President, was saying that dispute between India and Pakistan, it's none of our business. Those were the words he literally said. And what we now understand from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is that actually there's been a day of intensive negotiations involving him and J.D. Vance speaking to the leadership and the military leaders on both sides of the divide in India and Pakistan, finally getting them to talk and to agree to step back from the brink. Now, there's going to be more talks to finalise this ceasefire, but you know, it seems that for the moment, the threat of a spiralling, escalating conflict between these two countries, India and Pakistan, thankfully has receded, Michael.
Matthew Chance, thank you for the report from New Delhi. Joining me now to react to all of this breaking news, CNN senior military analyst Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, partner at the Carlyle Group, a global investment firm. He's also an accomplished author. His latest achievement, The Admiral's Bookshelf. Admiral Stavridis, can I say at the outset, it's a day like today that makes me appreciate CNN because of the footprint and the ability to so quickly go from Kyiv to Islamabad to New Delhi and to cover all of this, dare I say, very promising breaking news. Can we begin with Ukraine and Russia and talk about the prospect of what Moscow will now do?
Let's just stop for a minute and say, how rare is it you and I both show up with smiles on our face to talk about the international system?
It's true.
Yeah, and up front, I would score this as positives for the Trump administration, who have put pressure in both these situations, evidently, according to recent reporting. In terms of your question, I think with 70% likelihood, the pressure is now truly on Moscow for the first time since the Trump administration came into office. And I think Putin is realizing his strategy of simply playing rope-a-dope back and forth, is not going to work. The 30% that makes me less encouraged is the fact that Putin is coming off a big deal 4-day visit with President Xi. Could we now be seeing Russia, China align with the United States and Europe align, turning Ukraine into perhaps the ultimate proxy war between those two sides? Let's hope not. And let's be hopeful on this morning that Putin will wake up and smell the tea, so to speak, and take this ceasefire deal.
We all remember that Oval Office meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump and J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, and how that all turned out. The perception of many was that President Trump had been heavy-handed with President Zelensky, so too J.D. Vance. But in the reporting today, it seems as if the administration, the Trump administration, is sending a very deliberate message to Moscow to say to Putin, we're on board with the EU and with Ukraine. The ball's in your court. But if you don't take this deal now, there will be repercussions.
That's exactly right. And that would be additional sanctions, possibly secondary sanctions, putting sanctions on anybody who even does business with Russia. All that could have a crippling effect ultimately on a Russian economy that's already simply on a war footing. So there are levers, there are cards to play. I'm glad to see the Trump administration using them. And final thought here, Michael, I think Putin, his military losses of troops are also going to be a factor in this thing. And last thought, look at the pictures of those European leaders kind of coming together. This is a good moment for Europe and its unity. That's a good thing for the United States as well.
A final thought, Admiral Stavridis. One conflict that we're discussing is 3.5 years old. The other is only 3.5 days old. But I know from reading your recent piece at Bloomberg, you had some very serious concerns of the escalating situation between Pakistan and India. Speak to that, please.
History was on our side here. India and Pakistan have gone to war with troops and tanks and border crossings 4 times in 50 years. They've had a whole series of these kind of back and forth military events, even in the last 10 or so years. They've always managed to find a way to climb down. according to our reporting here at CNN, which is quite exceptional, which we just heard, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, I would say quite appropriately, was right in the middle of this. So history on our side, Secretary of State leaning in. Pretty good day for diplomacy, Michael.
Nice to be able to have you here. Fingers are crossed. Two big breaking news stories that might really alter the world picture for the better. Thank you, Admiral Stavridis.
Yeah, let me put one more point on it before we do all those high fives. Remember, 2 months ago, we had a ceasefire where? In Gaza between Hamas and Israel. That one's falling apart. Let's hope these two stay with us. I agree completely.
Thank you, Admiral. Up ahead, if AI can do the work, should we even go to college? Should our kids even go to college? And why even pay for it? We discuss that and the growing popularity of trade schools. Then, of course, the news story of the week was the election of Pope Leo XIV. Unexpected because many believed there would never be an American-born pope, especially at a time when the American president has so rankled global conventional norms. But maybe that's exactly why he was elected pope. Check out this headline from today's New York Times. An American pope emerges as a potential contrast to President Trump on the world stage. The story notes the differences between Pope Leo and President Trump, and then posits that some think that's exactly why he was selected by the College of Cardinals, as an antidote of sorts to Trump. Go to smirconish.com and vote on today's poll question. Was the election of Pope Leo XIV, an American, a deliberate choice meant to contrast with President Donald Trump? Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter while you're there for smirconish.com, for which Scott Stantis drew this.